We keep on going until we arrive in glory, right? Amen. Keep on going. Okay, let me start by seeing if you have any questions, observations about our discussion about curriculum today. Was anything prompted that you would like to pursue, explore around the curriculum discussion? And we didn't have time for opportunity to do that. Martin?
Yesterday you had given us this inductive Bible study questions.
Yes.
And I was quite impressed with the earlier part where we discussed the personal things.
Yes.
I was wondering, why didn't you include some of the personal questions in your book? Because it prompts a lot of...
That's really a good question. That would be a good addition, wouldn't it, to put some of those questions. That's why you have them on your step-by-step outline here. They are there. So if you look on page 39 and 40, some of those questions are there. Why didn't I put them in my book? Because I wasn't smart enough to put them in my book. That would have been a good appendix to have in that book, and which would be probably a good, I develop a lot of this stuff after I wrote the book. So what you're going to get in this particular outline this afternoon or this morning with the step-by-step approach, it was a coaching tool that I put together. But yeah, it should have been there. But hopefully you have some material now to use. What I would suggest, and I'll mention this when we get to it, is that when you begin a new group and people are unfamiliar with each other, to spend the first number of sessions with some of these sharing questions as at least a good chunk of your group, so you can get familiar with each other, tell the stories of each other's lives, help reduce the anxiety that people might be feeling as they're entering into a new group because they don't know each other. One of the best things to be able to do in a group as you're getting started is to ask some questions that create laughter. Laughter helps reduce anxiety. And so when you tell a story, I'll tell you one of my stories a little bit later on when we get to that point that I share about my early relationship with my wife. It's just fun to tell those stories, and you kind of drop the defenses and all that. So what you're pointing out is a gap in that material, and but hopefully you can find some other resources that supplement that and add to it. Rena?
You are not curriculum focused in this particular curriculum, but you allow the relational aspect to come in, which is missing from many of the curriculums that we have come across.
Right.
Most of them are curriculum-based and not people-based. So this is the uniqueness of this curriculum, and we really appreciate that.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Thank you. Anything else? Yes, right here. Sammy?
My question is, everything has a beginning and an end. When is the end of this discipleship course?
Why do you think people are laughing? Hey, what's that?
You said we should come with questions that open the atmosphere in terms of love.
That's right. He said, you said you should come with questions that create laughter. That's why people are laughing. Well, I think that they're laughing because I think the answer to that, when does this end? When Jesus comes again. So, I mean, it's what we do. We continue to invest and focus on people and grow people to become reproducers. And that becomes our life vocation, our life call. Okay, thank you. Let's turn now to page 37 in our material. And this particular lesson is intended to sort of take some of the mystery out of the process and maybe gather together in one place some step-by-step ways that you can go about initiating and sustaining the discipleship relationship. It's just a way of systematizing, sequencing the process that we hope will, in a sense, my guess is we have talked about probably all of these elements to this point, but we have not put them into a sequential fashion. And Jane will appreciate this because she's an engineer. And I think sequentially as well. So I'm a left brain kind of guy, as if you know that language. So this at least helps me kind of put it in some steps. And I use this as what I called my coaching tool with the disciple-making reproduction process. So first step is what? Pray, right. We pray to begin with. We pray for who the people are that God has called us to invest in. And we ask God to put on our hearts to grow a sense of conviction as to the people that we are to be focusing in on. And I like to pray over a period of time until I have a settled sense that God keeps bringing me back to people that I'm supposed to be coming to, so that when I am able to go to them, I feel like there is a strong conviction and draw to these people. We didn't quite mention this in earlier lectures. Actually, I didn't get to it because I didn't get into as far as the Jesus model of ministry and Paul's model of ministry as I would have liked. But the difference between Jesus' approach and the rabbinic approach, what was it? How did the rabbis gain adherents and students? What was the way that the rabbis had students attached to them? The students took the initiative to find the rabbi. And then, based upon their, in a sense, investigations of the rabbi, they decided that there was a particular rabbi that they wanted to study under or have model the Torah for the life. Rabbis were considered the incarnation of the Torah, the incarnation of the law. Their lives represented the law. But the student took the initiative. It was kind of like the mentoring situation. The mentees took the initiative to find the mentors. With the discipling, Jesus reversed the process. He prayed all night, remember? And the next day he called to himself the entourage of disciples that were following him, and from that group he appointed 12. He was the one that took initiative and appointed the 12. And so we're trying, in a sense, to follow that process. We're not Jesus. I understand that. But at the same time, I think that's still a good process where you are calling a disciple into relationship with you, and we are walking together towards following Christ. And so you are wanting to find out who that is, start taking notes. If you have your Discipleship Essentials book with you, turn to page 184 in your book. There are pages throughout the book that are called action pages. It's an action that a step you're supposed to take. And so built into this book is what I would call a triggering process, a triggering step. And right after lesson 20, as you're moving towards the conclusion of the material, it provokes you, in a sense, to start asking the question, who is it that God has called you to invest in? And it gives you some criteria here. You see this same thing on your outline, I believe, in terms of the loyalty and teachability qualities. Now, admittedly, the art of discipling is just that. It's an art. It's not a science. I don't know any ways to give you such precise criteria as to who should be the ones that you're inviting in as these more general criteria that I've tried to list here on this page. Jesus found people that would be loyal to him, and so when he called them, they were willing to leave behind what they had to go after him. So loyalty was a very important quality for Jesus. Teachability was an important quality. And oftentimes in church context, we tend to mirror the culture when it comes to the important people that we want to get into our relationships. So if somebody has position or money or influence, we tend to use worldly standards to go after those kind of people, because if we could get them, then they would be good prizes, for us to get. Jesus wasn't so concerned about that, was he? No. I like to say, if you were starting a new organization, like Jesus was, a new movement, and you wanted to impress people with who it was that you had as a part of your new movement, and they would be immediately recognizable, you probably wouldn't do what Jesus did. So what you see organizations that they're starting their new ministry, and along the left side of their letterhead for their organizations, they have their names of the people on their board of directors. And the attempt is to make sure you have names on the board of directors that everybody recognizes, because it gives you credence to these people that you're trying to get involved in your ministry or to support your ministry. Well, Jesus did a really lousy job at that. He got a bunch of fishermen and a tax collector and a zealot. And why? Because he was more concerned about a teachable spirit than he was position. He knew what he could make them become. And when you have the soft clay of a teachable spirit where people can be molded into what Christ makes them to be, I've watched this over and over again. Maybe it wouldn't be when I was first doing college ministry back in the 1970s. There were their upfront personalities, the people that really were attractive and charismatic, but oftentimes not very reliable. And so we had a worship leader. I remember his name clearly, 40 years ago, Mark Merritt, our worship leader. And he was a great guitarist, great worship leader, but unreliable. So we had to sit him down. And we had quiet, unrecognizable people that were so faithful, and we pulled them into the leadership team, and we watched them blossom and develop, become more than what they seem to be. So teachability seems to be an extremely important quality for Jesus in terms of what they become. You think of Peter and John, probably not all that well educated, but under Jesus' influence, what did they become? So John writes this amazing gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. Where did John get that? Because he was a fisherman? No. Because he was under the shaping influence of Jesus, and he was elevated beyond his circumstance because of his teachability. And so looking for that kind of, it's sort of an ineffable, hard to read kind of quality, and this is where you have to work with the Spirit to say, Lord, who you're leading me to. Sometimes you are led to people that you don't even understand why you're led to them. I had a man in my church who came to church with his wife because his wife said, come to church with me, and she's a pretty strong personality. But he would slip out as quickly as possible, especially during the summer months, to get on the golf course. He was a golfer, so went to the earliest service he possibly could so he didn't miss his golf game. And he happened to become our estate planning attorney for us, and so I got to know Bill through that. And it was pretty clear that Bill kept his professional life separate from his church life, and professional life was far more important to him than his church life. But as I was getting ready to start a new group, I began to pray about it, and Bill's name just kept coming to me. But I had no evidence that he had changed his heart at all. But I just could not get rid of the fact that the Spirit was impressing me upon it to follow up on this. So I called Bill up and I said, I want to come over to your law office and have a conversation with you. It's something I want to talk to you about. He said, okay, come on over. We sat down. And I invited him into this discipleship group. I said, I don't know why I'm asking you to do this, because except for the fact that I feel led to. He looked at me and he said, if you had asked me this 6 months ago, I would have said, not a chance. But somebody gave me the book, The Case for Christ, and I read it, and it changed my life. I'm ready. I'm in. I had no knowledge of any of that, that was happening. And it's been a wonderful thing to see what's happened. So sometimes that happens. Like that, where you just are led to somebody without really knowing why you are. It's not that you're observing what's going on in their life. So, pray and let that settle in. Number 2, make a personal invitation. Go to the person and have that face-to-face conversation. Something like this: the Lord has been placing you on my heart. I sense that I'm to ask you if you'd be willing to join me and 1 or 2 others on a weekly journey together toward becoming better followers of Christ. Would that be something you'd be willing to pray about? Would you consider that? Would you enter into that relationship? So you're making that eyeball-to-eyeball invitation, and you're letting them know that you're going to have a couple other people join you in that process as well. And then as a part of that process, you are describing a little bit the environment that's involved. The relational transparency, the truth and community, life-changing accountability, the missional outreach environment that you're trying to create there as much as you can. Maybe you just even focus more on the first one, the relational transparency side of things, so they have a sense of the kind of environment that they're being asked into. So that kind of invitation. I'm going to ask you to do something here that is maybe a little bit risky at this point. A little bit of role-playing with each other. We've been talking enough about this for long enough. So think about a person that's maybe has come into your mind already, and hopefully you've already been doing this, that you might want to invite into your first quad when you go back. Names come to your mind? People come to your mind? Okay, good. Okay. So I want you to turn to the person next to you, and I want you to articulate the invitation that you were going to give to this person. Okay? Practice it a little bit. It's going to be awkward, I can confess. It's a little role-playing exercise. But, share with the person next to you. What would you say to that person? How would you approach them? What would you articulate? Okay, talk to each other. All right, I'm going to break in at this point. Hopefully, when we get all the video stuff edited and put together, you'll get a chance to see yourself in this last moment. I was enjoying watching your conversations up here. You were engaged. That's good. So were you able to convince the other person? Did they give you an answer? Yes? Right in? Okay. What's that? You're going to pray about it. You're going to pray about it. Well, that's good. And in fact, you want them to take some time to pray about it and not give you the answer right there. That's one of the things that I think will come up in our order of things here in a moment. But you want to talk a little bit about what will be involved and how much the time commitment is and that kind of thing. So if you have a copy of the book with you as you're interviewing or asking, I should say, them to consider being a part of the group, you want to talk a little bit about, okay, what are we going to be doing here? So you review some of the content. You maybe have them take a look at one of the lessons so they can see what the format is. I've heard from some people that it's like, ooh, this book's pretty thick. It's a little bit overwhelming, in terms of the amount of stuff to cover. Get any of that response from people that, especially the Camarillo folks, you know? But that's why in the Nepali language translations, we broke it into 4 small books. So it doesn't look quite so overwhelming, right? That's with that. So go through some of the content, lesson format, the amount of time preparation would be involved, you know. How long does it take to go through a lesson and prepare all of that and memorize the scripture? Probably anywhere from, hour and a half to 3 hours, depending upon the amount of energy and effort put into it. But since you'll probably only go through a half a lesson a week, you can really cut that back a little bit. But at the same time, you want people to understand what they're getting into. You don't want to sell them on something on a false basis. You do want them to understand the nature of the commitment. And then you want to take some time to review the covenant. I've talked with you about this before, so we don't need to talk about it a whole lot right here. But when I go through the covenant with somebody, I ask them, as we look at the, 5 points on page 14, the elements that are here and walking through it, I tend to say things like, well, what do you think you're being asked to do? Put it in your own words. It's not just a matter of reading the words, but have them articulated. What expectations does this create for you? Those kinds of questions that I like to have as clarifying questions as you go through the covenant of the commitment involved. Why is a covenant important? Why is a written covenant important? Let's review this for a moment. Why do we put this down so explicitly in black and white for people to review? Makes them more responsible and they're aware of what they're supposed to do as a part of it. Okay? If it's just a verbal covenant, what could be the problems with that? They'll forget. Okay? Well, I thought it meant, or I thought it meant, and I thought it meant. And then you don't really have a base to go back to, do you? But when you put it in written form, you have it in black and white. You have a base to go back to. And if you're in your first group, as I will indicate here, your first time together, you want to review the covenant together, making sure that you're all on the same page. And it also makes for a sort of an equal level of investment, equal level of energy. As one who's been involved in church leadership for all my career, all my adult life, I've had a lot of teams and a lot of committees that I've led. Probably you have too. And if you don't have a clear covenant, you have a very uneven buy-in to what you're involved with. I'm sure you have seen this, because you have not articulated what's involved. And then each person has their own personal covenant. This is what the level that I have agreed to internally. But you have not articulated to each other what you have agreed to. So you have this uneven level of commitment if you don't have a written covenant that you can walk through and be a part of. So it clarifies expectations. It takes the unspoken and makes it spoken, and for everybody to be involved with that. So ask for prayerful consideration. Imagine most of your groups ended with, I'll pray about it. I'll pray about that invitation, which is good. In fact, you specifically want people to ask to be praying about it, to consider it. And so, as I said, I usually ask for a delay. I don't want somebody's answer right there on the spot, even though they may be willing to give it on the spot, because you want them to look at their overall schedule and see where does this fit in. And do you need to make any other arrangements in your life? Do you need to remove some things from your life in order to be able to put this in to your life? Like I said, we all sort of live right at the margins. There is no margin. There's no further stretch that we can do. And so oftentimes to make this a priority means you have to take something out in order to put this in. because you want them to be able, long-term, to be able to follow through on the commitment, not just to make an immediate snap decision. You're going to continue to add partners. You just want them to know that will be the case. One of the things you could do, and you may not have all of your discipling partners in mind. You've gone to one person, and maybe that's all you have at that one point in your mind. And you might say to that person, if they have agreed to be with you in this journey, do you have any others in your network of relationships that would be, good people to invite in as well? So don't just rely on your own network, but maybe they have friendships, people that they know that they think would be good candidates for this kind of relationship. So that's a way of engaging them in the process as well, to say they can pull people in maybe that they might be familiar with and comfortable with as well in that process. So set the first regular meeting time. Determine the best time for all, at least to begin with. The nice thing about a small group, a micro group of, say, 4 people, is that you can usually find a seam in the schedule that works for everybody. Sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to do that, at least for the first meeting. What I do in the first meeting is just, okay, let's find a time that we can all get together initially. And then from there, we'll look at our calendars and say, what's the best time for all of us? That doesn't have to be true of the first meeting. It's just a matter of getting together all in the same room at the same time, the same place at the same time, and then determining when would be the best time to meet. And that's the nice thing about a smaller group. Then you can have some flexibility as to when that is. One of my groups met at 5 o'clock on Monday afternoon. Wasn't my favorite time, but I could make it work. That was my attorney friend that surprised me by saying yes. And yes, surprised me not. He said, according to my schedule, I can slip away at that time of the day and meet. So we found others that could meet at that particular time, 5 o'clock. My preferred time is early morning, but so that's generally when my group times are. But it's not about me. It's about when the people can get together and hold to that particular time. The other nice thing about a small group is sometimes you'll have a couple of people that can't make it on a particular week, business trips, illness, vacations, whatever it may be. And then you can say, well, we normally meet at Tuesday at 6:30, but maybe all of us can meet this week on Thursday at 6:30. Because it's not that many schedules you have to rearrange. So it's still a smaller group that you can get together, and some of you are going to have different patterns as to when that will be. So I'm not assuming, and when we go to the adapting this to our cultures, you're going to come up with all kinds of different schemes as to way this is going to work best. Pradeep, I'm going to invite you to come up right now on this whole issue of scheduling. Are you ready to do that? In terms of what's the best way and time for your group to meet and how you've adapted that to your culture. Is this okay now, or should we wait on that? You're good? Okay. Do we have a mic here? I've asked Pradeep to do a couple things today because he's doing this in Nepal, but he has a different culture and other logistical challenges that maybe we don't have here. So can we catch him on camera here? Is that all right? We're good? Okay.
Talking about this
Scheduling, yes.
Hi, everyone. In our context, it's difficult because of geographical setup and transportation limitations. So as most of the people are working, we found the evening is better time. And in our setting, our group is quite bigger than the number of people we are talking about here, and I'm not trying to destroy the setting over here, but in our context, it works. We are like 7 people in one group, and you may ask, that's a too much crowd, but it works because we have at least 3 to 3.5 hours in one meeting. And that works perfectly in the evening because you don't have any other appointments after that. And I have found sometime when I'm done, when I tell the group, okay, for today we are done, but still they want to continue. So that's a good spirit, and that tells us something. Sometime, just Dr. Greg said that, okay, we have some other work, so maybe this week we will be a little bit flexible. Sometime we postpone to next week, and then I start to get messages from the members of that group when we are meeting again. So that tells me that they find it important, they find it a source of blessing, and when we meet together, everyone gets a chance to talk. So in one setting, in a smaller group, evening is the best for us. Thank you.
And sometimes I would assume that you cannot necessarily meet on a weekly basis because of the distance that people have to sometimes come together for, and so you might not be able to meet weekly, but that's one of the reasons why you have a longer time frame, right?
Yeah, and we also meet in another setting, and in that setting we are using transforming disciples method more, and we go to different places in Nepal, and we call it the training base, and there we meet once a month, but we meet for 1.5 days at once, and it's intensive, and there we call it the obedience-based discipleship. And that includes the evangelism, because as you know that still we are in a pioneering stage of Christianity in Nepal. So it's not only what you are learning and feeding yourself, but you need to go ahead and tell others about that. So in that process, sometimes we spend most part of day one in accountability. So we start with accountability questions. Okay, what did you learn? Whom did you share with? Whom did you teach what you learned last time? And so we find different answers. Some are coming with a very exciting news. Some come, okay, well, I didn't do. Then we try to find out the reason and how can we help with that. And we see it in the process that all of them come together in a very nice pace and we go smoothly. So sometimes what is the best part in this setup is the accountability time for me. Just recently, the 2 days before I flew to United States, I had 2 groups already in the southern part of Nepal. And every time we meet, I find one thread is going to each one's life. And that happens every time. I said, they're in a different setup, they are in a different work and different places. But when they share their testimony during accountability time, one thing is there in common that everyone is experiencing. Sometimes it's a persecution, sometimes it's a hatred, sometimes it's a blessing, sometimes it's an answer of prayer. But there is always one thing that goes as a thread in everyone's life. I think that's amazing. And that tells us there is a divine power of God in that group. And that makes us so curious about this group, and we always long for it to meet. So that's most of the day one. And then second half of the first day, we study together. And then we get a homework to do. And second day, first half, we discuss in a group, and then we disperse. So normally we do it once a month, and we are getting tremendous results. How many people they are bringing in the Lord, and when the people are in the Lord, then they are ready to teach them the milk lessons of the Christianity. What do they do? So while they are learning themselves, at the same time they are teaching others. So that's a multiplication is taking place. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So the point here is each one of our cultures will support a certain rhythm. And what I'm sharing with you about what works here may be impossible in your setting. Excuse me. So when Pradeep gets some of his people together who have to come from some distances, setting aside a longer period of time once a month is a rhythm that works there 90 minutes a week is not going to work. People have to come from too many differences. Evenings work better for some of your groups to come together because you're tied up pretty much in the day. So what is it that fits your rhythm? That's the remember, it's the transformative environment that we're trying to create. The shell around that, in terms of the patterns, is what fits you with that. So we're going to give you opportunity to think that through, adapt this to your own culture. So we're not trying to transfer the way we do it to you. We are trying to transfer the core principles. That's what's important. In terms of your setting for your time together, you want to be in a safe setting. Safe meaning place where you can share intimate things with each other. So determine the best quiet space so that you feel safe together. I say avoid noisy places, but at the same time, I know that Camarillo Community Church tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock at Denny's, you're going to probably create your own noise, I assume, there in terms of would you have, 30 people or whatever will show up tomorrow morning. So that works. You've created the space where that can happen. So the issue is more what's that safe place where people can feel free to share what's going on in their lives. They're sitting in the middle of Starbucks with all these people around us. We're probably not going to talk a lot about real personal things, but if we can create our own space. So I've met in law offices, insurance offices, around conference tables, my office at church, my private homes, parts of a church facility. But it's the issue is, where can you find that place where you feel comfortable and safe with each other? Number 8, guide the participants through the first few sessions. And this is where we'll talk about that in terms of the first few meetings here in the next part of the outline. The idea here is you as the convener of the group, the one who is the instigator of bringing the group together, it's helpful for you to kind of set the tone and set the pace, to be the leader so that people can see an example of how you take them through the content and how you set the tone for the kind of relational setting that's there. And then I think early on, you want to then convey to them, we're going to rotate leadership in this group, meaning I'll lead if I'm creating a group, I'll lead for the first few sessions, but I tell them right up front, in a few weeks, you're each going to take point on a lesson and guide them through the lesson. And why do I want to do that early on? Because I want people to overcome any mystery about how difficult it might be to do this process, because it's really actually not difficult. And people can see quite early on, I can do this. That's doable. I can see how I can lead a group like this. You want to overcome that kind of barrier as quickly as you possibly can. Number 9, model transparency. The group will go as deep as the willingness of the convener to be vulnerable. So to the extent that we are willing to share some of the chinks in our own armor, as to use an expression, or for me, share my fear and anxiety thread or other things that are going on in my life and be honest about those, then that sets the group members free to be able to go that direction as well. So the idea is that they will probably become as vulnerable as you are willing to be vulnerable yourself and set that tone. Now, we've addressed this a lot in this time together, realizing that there are cultures that are resistant to that kind of vulnerability. And hopefully, when we talk about adaptation later this afternoon, you will address some of those issues with each other. We're going to get into our teams that we're formulating together and have you identify those places and do some problem solving together. How are you going to address that relational transparency issue? How do you go about that in your setting? Is there ways to be countercultural that would get you to where you want to go? First few meetings. How do we set the tone in those first few meetings? I've talked about reviewing the covenant together. I'm going to skip through that. Then get to know each other. share your faith journey. So, as Martin has pointed out, there are some ways to be together early on so that you can enjoy the presence of each other. So I've given you some sharing questions under the getting to know each other side of things. Where were you born and where did you grow up? I think our first day in terms of our small group was, where did you live between the ages of 7 and 12, right? Was that interesting? How did you heat your home during that time? Did you even need to heat your home? Some of you probably live in cultures where, what do you mean heat my home? It's hot all the time here. We open the door, That's how we heated our home. Some of you are in cold climate cultures where you're, having to heat it in certain ways. Who was the center of warmth in your home? Or what was the center of warmth in your home? Was it a person? Was it something else that was the center of warmth in your home? And when did God become a warm person to you? Those are good icebreaker kinds of questions to talk. And some may say, when did God become a warm person to me? I'm still waiting for God to become a warm person to me. And that may tell you where they are at that point. But it's a fairly non-intrusive way of asking that question. So you have some things on your list here. B under 2. Tell us some things about your family of origin. Where were you in the birth order? Well, I'm a middle child. I've got an older sister and a younger brother. I'm not sure what that means, but that's where I am. What's that mean? What was one of your favorite family activities growing up? That is a really good question. Well, I think it was probably going to Palm Springs in the summertime. My dad loved hot climate, and so that's where we had our vacation, was in the desert. In the summer, Let's go to some place where it's 110 degrees. That really sounds like it's a lot of fun. But fortunately, we had a swimming pool, so that was good. D, if you're married, how did you meet your spouse, and share some things about that relationship? Is there a funny story connected to this? So my wife and I were students at UCLA, local university here. University of California at Los Angeles is what that stands for. So she was a member of a Christian sorority by the name of Alpha Delta Chi, and I was a member of a Christian fraternity by the name of Alpha Gamma Omega. And I had spotted this young lady as a part of the activities that we did together, and we had a fraternity event that was coming up. So I wanted to invite Lily to this event. So I call her up, and I introduced myself and said, "Hi, this is Greg Ogden from Alpha Gamma Omega Fraternity." Long pause. Who? I'm not off to a good start here. She doesn't even know who I am. This is going to be a tough conversation. Oh, and then yeah, okay, yeah. So I invite her to this particular fraternity event. And thankfully, she agrees to go to this event. And then she confesses to me later she thought I was somebody else. That's where our first date started. So tell that story as a part of early in our own dating history. So, these kinds of things that kind of warm you up to each other in terms of knowing some of your story of how you met your spouse. Interests or hobbies that you might have that you can do in your spare time. I personally love to ride a bike. I live along the ocean, so riding a bike along the ocean is one of my hobbies. I try not to ride it in the same way that Ralph rides a bike, but you never know. What's going to happen along those lines. So I better not say anything about that. So if you didn't know exactly what happened to Ralph and his arm there. So these are kinds of things that you can ask in your first sessions together. And then what I like to do also is have people share their faith journeys. And here's some of the elements that you can include in that faith journey. And what I like to do is, for the first 4 weeks that we're together, 5 or 6 weeks, have one person a week share their story. Don't try to do it all in one sitting. Just say, okay, this week it's going to be me, and then next week you. And here are some of the things that they can can include in their faith journey. Share some elements include in your faith story what brought you to faith in Christ. What have been some of the ups and downs of your faith journey? When have you been closest to God? When have you been furthest away? Tell us about that in terms of that journey. Who has been particularly influential in your faith? Has there been an individual? Like I had Don in my life that was influential in getting me launched. Did you have somebody in your life that you wanted to emulate and be like, that had an influence upon you? What was it about that person that you had great regard for? What were the qualities and characteristics of them? What are some of your deepest desires now in your relationship with Christ? One of the questions I love that Jesus asks people, you might recall in the story at the end of Mark chapter 10, where you had blind Bartimaeus. He's crying out on the side of the road, right? Son of God, have mercy on me, as he's walking along the side of the road, and he's arresting Jesus' attention, and people are saying, be quiet, be quiet. And then all of a sudden it says, and the teacher is calling for you. And blind Bartimaeus comes to Jesus, and what does Jesus say to him? What do you want me to do for you? Isn't that a great question? What do you want me to do for you? Now, the answer may have been obvious because Bartimaeus was blind, but he wanted Bartimaeus to articulate that, didn't he? To say what it was that he wanted him to do for him. So what are some of the deep desires in our life that we have in our relationship with Christ right now? And then finally, as a facilitator, lead the first few sessions and then rotate, as we indicated, and then remind people constantly about the two purposes, their own discipleship and then others. And then some thoughts just about how you keep this discipleship network growing and sustained. And I would be very interested in some additional insights that the Camarillo folks have on this one, because as you're growing the disciple network, how did you have to catch up with this and keep it flourishing? But one suggestion is establish a small oversight group, track the progress of groups so that you know which groups are meeting and how they are doing. And this oversight group can be coaches to be available to the leaders of those groups so that they can coach them along if they have problems and issues, or maybe there's a person in the group that is making it difficult, or it's a theological issue that they're raising. They have somebody to go to and somebody that the leader can stay in touch with that. So you want to also potentially have a visual of the growing network of the multiplication of groups. I've seen some churches that have a tree. So you've got the branches of the tree and the networks of the reproducing groups that are showing how one person's group led to this other person's group, and you got a visual representation of the growth of the discipleship network. You can create your own newsletter. I know that Camarillo Church has a newsletter like this here where you're putting this out regularly. Sometimes you can put short testimonies in this newsletter of the people that are being transformed, and people can read about the life-change experience that people are having. And so it's inspiring to read that in a newsletter. You can sometimes put little short articles. One of the articles I remember putting in our first newsletter that I did at the church in Northern California, to be provocative, was, Paul had no disciples. What? What do you mean by that? And just to talk about the discipleship language in the New Testament shifted from disciples to spiritual formation kind of language with Christ in us. And Paul never mentions disciples in his letters, right? Isn't that interesting? That word completely drops out. You have discipleship in the Gospels and the book of Acts, and then it vanishes. Does that mean discipleship vanished? No. Just the language in which it was talked about vanished, because he talked now with the Holy Spirit inside of us that was Christ in us, that was living our life out through us. So he was still talking about investing his life in people and be imitators of me as I am of Christ, and you have been a sounding board to others, and you've been a model to others, and it was still there, just different language that was used. So have a newsletter that kind of, if you have an electronic capacity to connect with people in your organization, then you can send these newsletters out electronically. The big challenge with what I would call a decentralized network with individual small groups meeting is to keep them feeling like they are a part of a bigger movement. Understand that? So you've got a little group meeting over here by themselves, group of 4, and they may feel like, oh, we're just by ourselves. But if you have a newsletter that's incorporating them as a part of a bigger group, then you have the opportunity to say, oh, we're a part of this movement, and we need to then be encouraged to continue to be a part of the movement. And then periodically, or whatever frequency, it's really helpful to get all the participants together in one location as much as you possibly can to help people see, oh my gosh, this is a bigger thing going on here. Now, how do you do that at Camarillo? Don't you have events every once in a while that brings the people together to help them see that how this thing is expanding and growing?
Okay, there we go. From the very beginning, we've had various kinds of events as the network has continued to grow. We've had to change the kinds of events that we do. When we first began, we've always had an oversight team that was watching the whole thing go on, and then we began to sense a need for our leaders to get extra input, and so we started to have quad leader meetings once a month, and we would try to give them helpful information and encouragement, those kinds of things. As the groups continued to multiply and got larger and larger, then we would have events. We would have major events. Sometimes we'd even bring in a speaker from the outside who would come in and talk about discipleship. And one time we even invited Greg Ogden to come in and talk to pastors all over the community. And we got everybody there for that. And we just, whatever, God was leading. But we did find that it was necessary to keep people motivated, to keep this a high visibility kind of thing. So we began to do events regularly to enable that.
Yeah. So it's I think of it as how do you continue to infuse energy into the system?
Right, right.
And holding up the value of reproduction is one of the things that you have to constantly come back to. The more the replication sort of gets away from the center, the more you still have to infuse that energy into the system or remind people of the value of reproduction, owning that value. So you have to have ways that you can continue to instill that into people.
And as a pastor, I'll stop every now and then and do a short series on discipleship.
Yeah.
And I'll interject that just to keep that, again, high value.
Yeah. And as I understand it, with I don't know if it's the lead up to this particular conference, but I understand every Sunday for 3 months,
yes,
you had testimonies in worship from the people in your quads.
We were giving Claudia training at that time.
Yeah.
She was doing it then. She was having somebody every Sunday.
Every Sunday.
Come up and share their testimonies and what this has been to them. So
that's a cultural shaping way to do it. It's inspiring people. It's real people from everyday life standing up in front of your congregation that represent the average person in the church. They see what's happening in that person's life. Then they say, oh, well, yeah, maybe that's something I should be a part of as well. And, how much have we been inspired, by the stories that we've been hearing as well?
Just want to let everybody know that behind the scenes, then we do an Excel spreadsheet. So
Okay.
when it first started, in column 1, you put the person who started it, and then in column 2, you put who is in that quad, and then it just keeps mushrooming. But that's, I think, the suggestion that you told me from the start to do, and it's worked.
Good. Yeah. So you're tracking your groups in that way. No.
Yeah, and Todd is coming in this afternoon again, and Todd has been doing this in a situation where the groups are multiplying into the thousands now.
Yeah.
And he's found a way to keep track.
Does he?
And yeah,
Okay.
he does. He
Well.
does, and so we're going to try to learn some things from him this afternoon.
That will be very interesting to hear. Okay, that kind of brings us to a conclusion of at least what I'm going to say at this point. You see on page 41, continuing to develop your disciple-making plan. Step 1, start your own discipleship experience. Who are the 2 or 3 people the Lord may be bringing to mind who could be invited into this experience? So I want to give you some time to work on this now. When we come back after your group time at 2:30, we're going to be going into the adaptation exercises so that you are going to start formulating your own plans. But work your way through some of these steps here, kind of summary steps. Are you going to use Discipleship Essentials as your curriculum? Do you have something else in mind that would work better in your context? What kind of content do you think people can handle? So just start a little bit on this. We're going to shift over to page 43 this afternoon. If you want to go directly to that, you can, and start working through some of that exercise here and familiarize yourself with the material on that page. Because from here on out, from this afternoon and then tomorrow morning at the 9 o'clock time, there will be more workshop time of you work with your teams, more or less, on that. We'll have a couple of inputs here at 2:30 with Todd being here. I'm going to ask Pradeep to do a little bit more, but it's mainly working through this. So go between page 41 and 43, start taking some notes, because the responsibility is now on you to formulate the plans.